Hello everybody, welcome back to another live workshop with me, Toby from Photorec.tv and the Photo Enthusiast Network. Thank you so much for joining us. I just thought it's been a little while since I've done one of these. We've had some major Lightroom changes since I last did a series of live workshops, which by the way are all still free and fully accessible on my YouTube channel, which you should be watching this through right now. Those in chat, thank you so much for saying hi and where you're from and how you're doing. I really appreciate it. One note, it does seem that YouTube wants to start you off at a very low quality resolution. So click that little gear icon and bring it up to the highest quality so that as we dive into Lightroom, you can see what I see. And it's nice and clear. And of course, in chat, you can let me know if things are not doing so well. Yeah, Mike says the audio is looping over itself. Have just one audio source going. Should not hear that. And if you are watching this, well, I don't know, I was going to say if you're watching this and you don't see me, who am I talking to? You hit refresh on YouTube and it should start showing. Yes, Patrick, you will be able to watch this later on YouTube. It's going to be instantly replayable through the magic of YouTube. So a couple things to get out of the way real quick. Just let you know, if you don't already follow me on Instagram or Twitter, you can do that. Links are right down below this video. In fact, there are a lot of helpful links underneath this video. So take a look and you will find those. You will find a link to this handout. 40 pages. 40 pages. I printed mine out on a black and white printer, so I don't get the full color. But if you print it out on color, or if you just look at it as a PDF, it is I was going to say beautiful. I think it's a pretty beautiful document that is up to date with the very latest version of Lightroom. And this is yours completely free. If you like this and you're not a pen member, I have more of these documents and guides that are part of the Photo Enthusiast Network. You can learn more about that and join for just a $24.98 or something for your first year. Again, links are right down below this video, so just look for that information down there. Also, I gave you some sample photos that if you want to follow along, oopsie, let's go here. If you want to follow along, you can download these and import them. Now tonight I'm not going to go slow enough that I think all of you will be able to follow along instantly, but as I said, through the magic of YouTube, you can pause and rewatch this as many times as you would like. So you can go back and watch me edit those same photos. Now I invited anybody who is interested to send photos in for a little bit of editing. We'll get towards that. We'll get to that towards the end of tonight. So. Yeah. Also, it sounds like most people audio is working just fine. Double check that you don't have me open in 2 tabs. That can also be an issue that's happened to me before, where you have the web page open at Photorec.tv, and then you actually have gone to the YouTube as well, and you don't realize that both are playing. So, I think I wasn't ready to go to Lightroom yet. I was ready to go to me. One more thing that I want to say before we move along is that Topaz is still offering that bundled discount of Sharpen, Denoise, and Gigapixel all together for $99. You add in the Matte K15 promo code, and it brings it down to, I think, like $84 for 3 programs. That is a fantastic deal. So take advantage of it if you haven't already. I'm not sure how much longer that deal is going to last. They had a countdown timer that was supposed to end Monday night, but as I said, it's still live. So take advantage of that. All right. Roy, thank you for being in the chat. Roy is the magician behind the scenes running, capturing questions, just making sure we all know what we're doing, really. He will be watching the chat for your questions. This will be a fairly informal workshop. There'll be great periods where, great stopping periods, natural ones where my slow computer pauses, that's a great time for me to pause and look at questions. So I'll be keeping an eye out for those, but Roy will be capturing them. It's nice if you put a Q in front of it, a capital Q, to call out and a little bit more, to make it noticeable that it's a question. And we'll be getting to those. Some of you sent questions in, some of you sent emails about some editing, and again, we'll get to that towards the end of the show when we do dive into a little bit more of what you submitted and all of those. So, all right. And Roy has put into chat the Topaz Labs link along with the promo code to snap those up. Now, I think that's all that I needed to say. If you're watching this and you're not subscribed to this channel, that would be nice too. And also, it's very nice if you hit that thumbs up button then, because people know that this was a valuable video. You can wait a little while if you want to. That's just fine. Okay. So we're talking about Lightroom. This is a workflow workshop. So I really want to work through editing a few pictures. How do I bring pictures into Lightroom, make changes to them, make use of many of the tools, especially the new masking tools within Lightroom. They are drastically different from how they used to be and way, way more useful and really can speed up your workflow. And even for me, I'm not going to Photoshop as often because of the way these masking tools work. It's really nice to stay in Lightroom as much as possible. There are really compelling reasons to go to Photoshop, but I like to stay in Lightroom as much as possible for a couple of reasons that we'll touch on when we get to that section. But I do want to take you into Photoshop and back to Lightroom. And I want to take you into Topaz programs. And yeah, I'm going to use the Topaz programs as an example, but really any third-party program, any kind of plug-in to Lightroom or Photoshop, I'm going to show you how to get into there and back to Lightroom. So the very first page after the cover page covers kind of like the basics of Lightroom, what it is, the idea about a catalog. If this is new to you, you should take some time to review this on your own. We're just going to kind of jump right in and talk about importing. A lot of you I see in chat, you've been on workshops with us, you've been to my sessions, but you say you come back and you learn something new every time. I'll be honest with you, one of the things I love is every time I do this workshop, it pushes me to learn a little bit more, make sure I'm up to date on everything I'm talking about. And so I like doing these for myself, but I really do like doing these for you all too. So let's dive in to Lightroom. I don't think you need to see me anymore. And let's start. So you're ready to import. You've already decided where your catalog is. It's someplace nice and smart, and now you're ready to import. So I'm going to hit the import button. I happen to already have an SD card in my little card reader. It doesn't matter if you are pulling in from a card or from a camera. It's all the same. So that has loaded up a series of pictures that I snapped when my brother's family was here, and we went on a quick little trip downtown Seattle and we saw the gum wall. So you are right now in the import dialog box. And every once in a while I get a call, panic. People are very confused because they hit the import window and it looks like this. Did you all see what I just hit? You can change the view of the import window with this little triangle in the bottom left corner. That's how you get in and out of this. And so if you see a tiny little import window, hit that triangle in the bottom left corner to make it expand. Over on the left is our source. Where are we pulling these images from? Over on the right are all of our options of things to do to these images as we import them. Now, I've got a lot of reasons that I use Lightroom. I think you came to this workshop because you're interested in Lightroom. I don't know if you need much convincing that it is a great program. I'm not saying it's a perfect program, but it is a great program and how much work it can do for you. That's the key for me. We are generating so many images as photographers. We're going out there and capturing tons and tons of images. You go on one of our workshops, you might easily come home with a couple of thousands of images. Managing that amount of images is a daunting task, and the tools that Lightroom gives us, I think, makes it just a little bit easier. So let's walk through these over here on the right-hand side. And page 2, 3, 4 of the packet walk you through exactly what I'm covering right now. So if I go a little too fast, it's in the packet for you. And again, remember, you can pause at any time. All right, build previews. I'm actually going to switch this to standard right now. Standard previews are fine most of the time. Remember, Lightroom does not store your images. It stores previews of your images. It simply passes your images through to some destination where you decide to store them. We'll come back to that in just a second. So I am building standard previews. I'm not going to build smart previews, and I'm not going to talk about them right now, but they are powerful both for people with older machines and laptops where they may be storing these images on an external device. So I talk about that more in the packet. Of course, I do not want to import suspected duplicates. I'm already generating thousands of pictures. I don't want to accidentally bring in 2,000 pictures, half of them being the same. So I always have this box checked. Second option, make a second copy too. This is the first really useful thing that Lightroom will do for you that I think you need to do every time you import, and that's make a backup of your pictures. On import, the moment you import, you should be backing up your images. So I'm going to check that box, and I have a external drive separate from the external drive where I'm going to put these pictures, and I'm just going to add photo backup. And these pictures are going to go into that folder. Lightroom won't be aware of those pictures. These are backups that it's just moving for us as part of this import process. I don't do the collections. File renaming. This is great. If you've attended any of my workshops, you've heard me talk a lot about this. This is the second piece of work that Lightroom does for you on import that is really useful. So look at these files names over here. I'm going to zoom in. Look at this. DSC 08199. That is a very unuseful file name. I don't know anything about it other than it was taken after 8198 and taken before 8200. So on import, I set up a custom renaming system, and I'll show it to you here, that appends the date the picture was captured, not the date of import. It's smart enough to add the date the picture was captured, a small amount of custom text, and then the original file name. I do like the original file. I mean, it has some use. I just trashed it. I just really said it didn't have any use. But it has some use in that if you import and realize it's corrupted and you need to go back to your SD card or the camera card, you can figure out what file it was because you have the original file name as part of this new and improved file name. So this is it right here. And again, I have videos on Pen that show you exactly how to build this. But it's just a matter of sticking in these different bits and saving it as a preset. And so it's just right here as custom setting. When that is active, this little box becomes active, the custom text. And so I can say Thanksgiving family. And maybe I'll come back over and spell Thanksgiving correctly. So now if you look down here, it's showing me a sample of what this file is like. And yes, this file name gets a little bit long, but that's fine. And you look at this file name. This is a very helpful file name as soon as I see the text. I don't even need to see the thumbnail to figure out what's going on or what's probably in this picture. I know when it was captured. I know roughly what it was. And of course, the original file name. It's all right there. It's all useful. So I always rename my file names. Also, when you import and rename your files, they become searchable inside and, this is huge, outside of Lightroom using this term. So let's say in 3 years, I'm starting to lose brain cells, let's be honest. And I can't remember when Thanksgiving was or what it was, but I can remember that I probably called them Thanksgiving. If I search my computer for Thanksgiving, these files are going to appear. And I find that much, much more helpful. It's very helpful on trips where I will put in, Italy or Greece or Antarctica. And then inside or outside Lightroom, these file names are searchable using that text. I like that. Good? Now, scrolling down a little bit. Apply during import. We're up to the third thing that Lightroom does that is incredibly useful on import. And that's does a little editing for you. I hear this all of the time. Toby, I don't want to spend hours editing my pictures. You know, honestly, some days I don't either. There are days where I love to edit and I'll put on some good music, sit here, and I can get lost in an image and really work at it. And there are other days where I want to get through 200 images and get them out to a client or publish them online for the family to see after a trip. And the first kind of part of this, the first key to all of this, is the fact that you have to figure out which ones are the winners or the losers in these. And if they're landscape pictures, a lot of times you're going to be shooting them a little bit underexposed. It might be tough to tell the composition if they come in straight out of camera. But if you edit them on import with a little auto edit that Lightroom provides, then they look pretty good. It's not a finishing. And if this is one of your best photos, you're probably going to reset that auto edit and start editing it from scratch. But it is the beginning of a decent edit that will allow you to quickly make some judgment calls about that image. So I really like this, and I'll show you how to build it soon. Metadata, it's nice to put in a little copyright there as well. No, it's not foolproof. That doesn't mean that somebody is going to keep somebody from stealing your work, but it's nice to write it in there. And again, pen videos on how to do this. Keywords. This is a spot. Let's zoom back out for a second and see. We got a couple of different of my nieces and nephew here. This is a spot to put in general keywords. So I might write family, Seattle. Oh, it inserted vacation for me, autofill. That wasn't family vacation. Let's just do family, Seattle, and let's do brother family. Yeah, that looks good. Kind of 3 general keywords there that, again, are helpful inside Lightroom. And when you export in some other applications, put them online, put them into Google Photos, these keywords can continue to be useful. So that's what I've got right here. Now, we've done the file handling, file renaming, applying during import. Now we're down to the destination, and this is where I see so many people go wrong, and where Lightroom isn't as helpful as I would like it to be, because the default to Lightroom is by date. And you can see here that it's going to insert a year picture and then a year, month, day picture and stick all of those pictures inside my pictures folder. That's kind of the default of Lightroom. And this might seem useful, but I'll be honest with you. As I said, brain cells are declining. In a couple years, at a glance, I am not going to remember what I was doing on 2021-11-23. So I need some descriptive text there. Also, these pictures all happen to be from the same day, but if this was a trip and I hadn't imported for a day or two, it's going to want to split them up between days. I don't need that kind of granularity with my folder of pictures. Lightroom provides so many ways to look at certain subsets of your pictures, including by date. Even if they're all in one folder, you can say, show me all the pictures I took on the 23rd. So I don't need to do that. If you do, I'm not going to argue against you. If it works for you, that's fine. But I don't think that you need to make a folder for every single day. So I'm going to come back up here and say into one folder. And I'm going to really pay attention here and put these pictures where I want to put them. So closing the hard drive. I don't put pictures on my hard drive. My hard drives are small. My internal hard drives are small. And it doesn't matter. I'm showing this on a Mac, but these things are all the same. They just would have slightly different names here. I have a bigger drive called Redwood. And in that, I have a photos folder. And in that, I have a folder for different years, including 2021 photos. So I'm going to click there. So that is selected. Now up here, I'm going to check into subfolder, and I'm going to create this subfolder. Now, I said I didn't like the date that Lightroom was giving me. I do like dates, but I just want some descriptive text too. So I'm going to type the year, the month, and the day, followed by some descriptive text. Family Thanksgiving, or Thanksgiving family. I think doesn't matter. But notice that it's incredibly similar to my file names. Yes, there is a redundancy in the system that I think is useful. So at a glance, I see this folder. I know that, oh, that was 2021. So in 3 years, I was like, oh, that was the Thanksgiving a couple years ago. And I'm pretty sure I know what's in it without even having to open that folder. So with this folder selected and into subfolder checked with that descriptive text, if I scroll down a little bit, way down here, it's ready to go in. See, it's a slightly different color with that little plus sign. That means that Lightroom is about to create that folder for me and put all of these pictures in there. Make sense? It's always nice to take a moment and check that that folder is where you expect it to be. It happens to a lot of people, including myself, that I think I'll have selected the folder and then the pictures are imported and I realize that no, the folder I thought would be created was not created and now I'm not sure where they are. Let's recap this real quick. I'm building the standard previews. I'm renaming the files. On import, I am editing them with auto preset that's provided by Lightroom, plus a little bit of my own magic. I will show you. Adding copyright, couple of keywords, and now I'm sticking them into a folder that Lightroom is going to create for me. From time to time, I run into people that do, the import outside of Lightroom, or they bring pictures in to their computer and then they have Lightroom bring it in. I just think these tools work really, really nicely and it does a lot of work for you. So I let Lightroom manage all of that. That's my reasoning for it. If you have a system that works for you, then you should be in pretty good shape. All right, I'm going to hit import. And now we've got two things that are going to be happening in this top left corner of the screen. It's going to be importing the pictures, copy and import photos, and it's building the previews. So those two things are happening at the same time. If we right click on one of these pictures and say show in Finder, here it is in this folder, and I can see the path to this folder at the bottom, and we can see more and more pictures appearing. Notice they pop in for a second with their old names, and then they get renamed as they come in. So let's switch back to me for a second. Let me look and see if I've got any questions that would be good to answer right now while we wait for these to import, because my machine is a little bit older. This import process can take a bit of time. That's one of the reasons why I switched it back to standard previews. One-to-one previews take a while to build. I rarely build one-to-one previews on this machine. I'd say I rarely build one-to-one previews in general, unless I know that it's a small subset of pictures that I will really be looking at each picture in great detail. If you build standard previews, when you open up a picture in the develop module or library and you zoom in, it does then build a one-to-one preview. So you end up with the same, but it's whether or not you want the machine to take the time to build them now or build them as you go in from there as well. So let me take just a moment to open up the document with questions in it and see if there's any questions that I should ask or answer right now. For you all. Mike says, when I input my Lightroom, or Lightroom says no previews available, what turns them back on? I suspect you're saying in the import window it says no previews available. Will it allow you to? I need a few more questions there. I don't have a good answer to that, other than that might be your computer needing a little bit of update for the raw viewer. I don't know about that one, Mike. Sue wants to know, when importing to a laptop, can you upload directly to a hard drive? Yes, you can upload directly to that laptop's hard drive or an external hard drive. This is a good spot for me to stop for a second and tell you how I work generally when I'm traveling. So I have this laptop right here, And in this little pocket, which I love, $13 on Amazon, I'll try to find the link and put it there, it holds a 2 terabyte SSD. This is where my catalog and all the photos for a current year live. So right now, all of my 2021 photos are on here. They're also backed up on my bigger machine and its external hard drive. On trips, I import to this drive, and when I come home, I don't have any switcheroos to do. All I need to do is plug this drive into my other machine, and then it automatically gets backed up. And I really like that. In fact, I continue to work off of it. Whatever machine I'm working on, this drive is plugged into, and I'm working on those current pictures. Previous year's pictures are all part of a larger, slower catalog. And that has worked out well for me, although honestly that catalog is getting so big that I think this is the year where I'm going to split it up and maybe have my really old stuff, and then my more recent stuff, and then the current year stuff. As more and more pictures get into a catalog, the slower it gets. But generally, I do recommend you have as few catalogs as possible, because then you have one place to go to see as many pictures as possible. I know some people have a new catalog for every event or client they work with, and then that seems to be a lot of different catalogs. And then you're constantly opening new catalogs, and Lightroom basically shuts down and reopens every time you're opening a new catalog. So that to me feels a little inefficient, but I'm not going to tell you it's wrong, just a little inefficient. One thing you do want to make sure you do regularly is back up your catalog. Your catalog does not contain your pictures. I hope that's clear. I think I said that in a minute ago. What Lightroom just did for me was built previews and moved all of these pictures, or copied all these pictures from the SD card onto that Redwood drive that I said. So they're not in Lightroom, but if Lightroom's catalog got corrupted or lost, I lose all of the keywords, all of the kind of rankings, ratings, and any edits I've done to pictures, which, that's a significant amount of stuff that you've done, so you don't want to lose all of that work. All right? So, but you can certainly upload directly to your hard drive. You just don't want to run out of room. Deb says, I recently started importing my photos directly to my hard drive, then adding them to Lightroom after I do that. If I import directly, Lightroom duplicates each picture, so I get 2 copies of it on my hard drive and in Lightroom. Deb, you talked to me when we were in Zion, but it's done this to you before and you're able to fix it. Now your fix hasn't worked this time, though. That's right. I remember talking about this, and that is a weird issue. Deb, we need to work together some more to fix that. I don't have an answer for that. Nancy says, if you want to move your photos from your hard drive to an external, how do you make sure Lightroom can still find them? Nancy, this is a great question. And the answer is, do it inside Lightroom. Lightroom has that power. And here's the thing. This is one of the reasons why I say try to use as few catalogs as possible, because then you just go into that catalog, there's all of your pictures, and if you need to move a group of pictures from one drive to another, you can do it in Lightroom. I actually have a video that shows exactly this, because what happens to a lot of people is they start to fill up a hard drive, then they go buy a new big one, or they fill up their laptop hard drive, and they need to get those pictures off to have room to actually make it work anymore. And you can do it all in Lightroom quite easily. You really just drag and drop. I'll see if I can come back and show that soon. Okay. And then Valerie wants a link to that external drive pocket Toby showed for the laptop. Yeah, geez. Honestly, the best $13 I have spent in a very long time. It's so nice to pick the laptop up without worrying about cords dangling. And I do really like SSDs for travel and for editing off of, not only because they're faster, but if they do get banged around, it's not the end of the world. Whereas your typical spinning hard drive, although you can get lots of space for really cheap, they're a little bit more fragile. So you want to be careful. All right. Lisa wants to know my metadata best practices. Basically, I insert a copyright symbol, my name, and 2021, and that gets inserted into the metadata. That's about all I have to say about that, Lisa. Okay, I think those are the questions that we can answer right now at this moment. So let's come back over to Lightroom and take a look. it's still building the standard previews. I'm going to stop it just because I don't need it to do that right now. So here we are in the library panel. And again, judging in the chat and the number of people watching, a lot of you have been on workshops and you've been through this, you've watched these things. I think I'm going to be pretty quick through some of this stuff. First thing, because I only have 44 previews here, I'm just going to make these thumbnails a little bit bigger so we can just kind of balance this view a little bit. Nancy, if you're paying attention, I'll show you real quick. Let's say, for instance, that I realize that I put this folder in the wrong place and I need to move it to one of these other folders. I could literally drag and drop it on one of those other locations. If I have a different drive, notice that it only knows about the Redwood drive right now. If I wanted to teach it about another drive, I could add a folder on that drive. So clicking Add Folder brings up my Finder window. It's going to be the same in Windows. And I can go to, for instance, this drive. And I could put a new folder on it. Lightroom 2022. Let's say I'm traveling into the future. And I choose that. Now notice over here, that drive has suddenly appeared and is now active, and I could simply drag and drop onto that drive. And Lightroom will be very happy to do that work for me, and then you can be assured that you're not going to lose the connection to pictures. Because here's why Nancy's asking that question. If I went outside of Lightroom and I took this folder, Family Thanksgiving right here, and I moved it over to that sandy disk, Lightroom is going to be unhappy because I'm doing that outside of Lightroom and it's not aware. It's not constantly monitoring all of these folders. So then next time I go to open it up, it's going to just be broken. So we want to watch out for that. Just watch out for that. Don't do it. That's the simplest answer. Don't do it. Okay. Now your goal after the import session is to sit down, figure out the winners and the losers. This is where, let's switch to a different folder because honestly, when it comes to my nieces and nephews, they're all winner pictures. Let's come to this trip this past summer, quick little weekend trip. Actually, sorry, this was last summer. Weekend trip up into the North Cascades. And your goal now is to go through these pictures and find the ones that you think are worth keeping and find the ones that are worth getting rid of. And I'll say this, be very generous in your keeper list. That might sound funny, but go ahead and give out the 1 stars like the cheap candy at Halloween. Just almost everybody gets a 1 star. If a picture has any kind of value to you, you can give it a 1 star. If it's pretty exciting, if you're like, ooh, this is good, then you can go ahead and give it 2 stars. Your goal here is to take your number of pictures, in this case 81, to a much more reasonable number. Or the reality is, when you come back, as I said, from a trip, you might have 4,000 pictures. If you come home with 4,000 pictures, you're going to feel very, very daunted about starting this whole editing process. But if during the course of the trip, you can each night check in, download the day's pictures, pick out a handful of winners, mark some for deletion if you wanted, then you're going to come home with a much more manageable number. So let's do it real quick here. This is where you open them up, and you do want to do this in the library panel. The library panel loads these pictures in a nice view much faster than the develop module. The develop module gets you ready for editing, and it's much more sluggish when you go from picture to picture. So I've got this one, and then this one is a little tighter, and then this one, but you can really see those people. I kind of want it to be like its own little island. And then I cut off a little bit of the end there. And this one. So you know what? I think this last one looks good to me. I'm going to hit 1 star. And then we're going to go through. I found this nice little yellow flowers, some exposure issues there a little bit. But you know what? This one right here, I like that one. I'm going to hit 1 star. And I'm just using the right arrow keys to kind of go through each of these. I like where I framed that with a little bit of those bushes there. I'm going to hit 1 star. But I'm just using the right arrow key to navigate through these and find images that speak to me. We got up a little bit higher than that island. Sure, that's a little bit different. And that's neat too. 1 star there. So once you've worked through this, I could see I was shooting for a panorama. So I want all of these images. I'm just going to hit 1 star for each of those and go through. That's cute. And that's cute. Yeah. Now, let's say that I've gone through this whole album of these and I've hit 1 star for each of them. Yeah, and I know you might be thinking 1 star, that doesn't sound like a good experience. That doesn't sound like a good restaurant I want to go to. That doesn't sound like a good movie that I want to see. But for me, 1 star is the beginning of something useful. And now, once you've 1 starred a group of images in a folder, you can filter right here in the bottom right corner. You can filter based on the rating. So I'm going to select that. And now, geez, out of 81 pictures, I'm down to 13. Now, I didn't go through this whole album, but you're going to be working with a much more selective subset of pictures. So let me get me on the screen for a second as I'm talking to you a little bit. You're going to be working with a much more selective set of pictures that I think has some real value in working. Now, I didn't mark any for deletion. I think you should, if they are true terrible pictures. And by terrible, I mean totally out of focus. Accidental shutter. There are multiple times on a trip where I'm putting my camera away or getting it out of the bag when I left it on and I accidentally hit the shutter as it's coming. So I have these like half blurry pictures of the inside of my camera bag and then of my leg and then of the sky sometimes. Usually not quite that. But those get deleted. Or if I have a series of 4 images that are really truly duplicates. Maybe I did a burst mode when I meant to only do 1, or I did take 4 pictures, but really nothing changed between them. No composition change, no kind of exposure change. None of that's different. So there's no reason to keep a bunch around. But those are really all I would recommend you delete if you are kind of a beginner. Because what I see happen is you start to edit one picture and you realize, oh, you know what? I like this example of this island. I nicked part of the island off. Let me go look at those other pictures that I passed up at first glance and see if I did a slightly better composition that gives me just a little bit more. It's those little things that you might not see at the beginning that start to make an image more impactful down the road. So as you're picking the winners, you might not always get the great one. And as you start to edit, you might realize it and want those other ones to go back and look and see if you did a little bit of a better job. Mike asked a great question right now. I'm assigning 1 star to select keepers. Any reason why not to use the pick, the X, and the U? Or is that just personal preference? That's a great question, Mike. It is pretty much personal preference. The other way you could do this is the letter P will flag a picture as a pick. The letter X will flag that as a rejected image. And when I talk about deleting, that's actually what I mean. Hit the X key to mark it for deletion. And then U will unflag it and put it back into this neutrals territory. The reason I use the stars is because for me, the 1 stars will then often move up to 3 to 4 to 5. 5 star being the highest that you can rake something in Lightroom. And again, very personal. Very personal information I'm sharing with you. No, I think many photographers are this way. I am very, very selective in what makes it to a 4 or 5 star. In a year, I will probably create a couple 4 or 5, I should say a couple 5 stars. I might make 10 or 15 4-star images in a year. But 5 star, really just a few. I make a lot of 2 and 3 star images, and that each to their own as about how they judge their work. But here's my recommendation for you: the more selective you are with those higher ratings, the more when you filter by 5-star, you truly are looking at only your very best work. So I think that's a nice thing. When I go back to my big catalog that has all of the past years and I ask it to filter by 5-star, that is my best work, and I don't have to do any extra filtering to say, oh, this one shouldn't be in this and this, It's really my best work. And if I want to include more, then I back down to 4-star rating or 3-star rating as well. So, but let's say you've marked some for deletion, and then you can just ask Lightroom to delete those by going to Photo, Delete Rejected Photos. And I do talk about this in the packet. I delete those from Lightroom. When you go to do this, Lightroom says, do you want to delete them from, let's do it real quick. And I can just show you exactly what I'm talking about. So let's take this filter back off. This very first one, that's not worth keeping. So I hit the X key, it marks it as deletion. And now if you can see, it's grayed out with that little flag that gives me the X to let me know that it's rejected. I'm sorry, photo. You can't all be winners, especially the ones I'm taking. So now when I go and do this keyboard command or go to Photo Delete, I get this question: delete it from the disk or just remove it from Lightroom? When I do these workshops in person, I make you answer, but since I can't hear you all, I'm just going to tell you, delete it from the disk. If you were removing this from Lightroom, why would you want it to stay around in the background, taking up space, but never being in your eyeballs? To me, there is no reason, so I delete it from disk. But you could, if you wanted to, just take it out of Lightroom. So keep that in mind. I'm going to hit delete from disk, and that image is now deleted and gone. It actually goes and sits in the trash, so you could put it back, but there are going to be a couple more steps to get it back into Lightroom. So keep that in mind. All right. So you've done your star system. You've gotten the images down to a subset of images, and you want to talk about editing them. So let's move on to editing them. And I've got a folder of workshop images here, and I provided for you all, which images? That one, that one, that one, that one. I feel like there's one more. Is that it? Oh, I think that was it. 4 images. These are images that are downloadable. You go to the photorec.tv and click on the Lightroom workshop, and there's a little link to download these images, and so that you could follow along. Let's talk about editing. Let's start with a scenic image. I think most of you watching are probably landscape photographers. This isn't the most amazing image, but I think it's a nice example to work on for this. So we're going to move into the develop module now. And let's go to just Lightroom. So look at our basic panel. All of our sliders have moved a little bit. Why? Because when I imported them, I asked Lightroom to apply that auto preset. How do we build that auto preset? Let me show you right now. I'm going to show you how to build the auto preset. I'm going to hit the reset button right here so it takes it back to straight out of camera. Nothing's been done to it. I'm going to go down, and you may have differences of opinions about using auto preset. Not all of my photographer friends use it. I respect their opinion, but I think that the value and the time it can save you jump-starting your editing, especially for things like family pictures or vacation pictures, where these aren't pictures where you're agonizing over every detail. The auto editing can do a really nice job. And for making it easier for you to pick winners from losers, I think the auto preset does a nice job. All right, but first, if you don't like auto edit, you must. You're a goofball if you don't. Check these 2 boxes here. To remove chromatic aberration, even the really nice lenses have it. Cheaper lenses have it more. Lightroom will take care of it to a degree for you. And also enable profile corrections. Lightroom will look at the metadata and decide what it was shot with and apply a preset correction to fix it. Let's see if we see much of a difference here. It flexes a little bit of distortion with a 24-70, but it was shot out at 70, so not a lot. But it's still worthwhile to do. You should do that, and you should make a preset with at least this that gets applied on import if you don't plan to do the auto. All right, so I'm going to come back up though and do a couple of things. One, I like to have a little slight contrast tone curve. And if you are looking in the tone curve, if you're madly following along right now, and you look in the tone curve and you don't have a slight contrast, that's because I made it. And it looks like this. It is the shallowest S-curve in the world. It's just these are the shadows. I brought them down just a little bit. These are the highlights. I bring them up just a little bit. And then I save that and call it slight contrast. So I'm going to keep that on slight contrast. I do that. Now I'm going to come back up. I am going to go ahead and add in some texture. I honestly can't remember what I put in the packet. I think 30. And clarity, I'm going to come up to about 10, 15, somewhere in there. It's going to make the picture pop a little bit more. Let's zero these back out by double clicking. You can see there's a little bit more pop. I wouldn't do a lot here because this is going to be automatically applied to every picture. And there are some pictures, maybe lower light pictures, where when you start to add texture and clarity, it's going to make a noisy picture even noisier. So you want to watch out for that. Okay. Why texture and clarity and none of the rest of these? Because auto takes care of all of the rest of these. So texture, clarity, slight tone curve, and chromatic aberration, basically lens correction. Now, come over here to the left side, and I'm going to click the preset plus sign right there. And I click create preset. So it comes up with, what do I want to call this? I like to call it something fun, like Auto Magic 2021 import or import preset. Something that at a glance you know, hey, this is my preset I should apply to all of my imports. Okay? Then you want to check auto settings, and it should take care of itself. You want texture and clarity to be checked because we made a change to those. Notice that none of these can be checked because auto is going to take care of it for you. Tone curve is checked. Lens correction is checked. I'm not making any transformations or details, any of these other things automatically to all pictures. Calibration should just be on. Yeah? Does that look good? And I hit create. Now, that lives over here. I just made that. Auto Magic 2021 import. The one I used when I was just demonstrating this a few minutes ago was the 2021 import preset right here. Okay? So, now that you've made that, or when you make that, the next time you go to import, it will be in that drop down and you select it. What if you forget? You say, Toby, I forgot. I've imported billions of pictures and I've forgotten. Well, let's come back to this real quick. You can select all of these pictures in the library panel and look, there's an import preset right here. I just made that Auto Magic 2021 import. I can click it and it will apply to all of these pictures at once. So yes, you don't have to do it when you import. You can do it after. Or if you wanted to, let's say you only wanted to do a subset. You, of course, could select just the yellow flower ones and then choose that preset, and then you're going to be golden, just like that. Or, of course, let's come back into where we were, and we were just filtered to the 2 stars. You could select an individual picture and apply just that preset in the library or in the develop panel. Once you move to the develop panel where we were, they're over here on the left-hand side. And from time to time, I get asked questions like, how can I get rid of these over here? You can go into your manage presets and remove check marks from the ones that you are not using. And you should do that as long as you promise you won't forget that you've done it, because then you'll go, where are all those presets? I know I bought this great pack of presets. But hide them because it makes this list more manageable, and it actually does help Lightroom speed up a tiny bit because it tries to give you a quick preview when you mouse over these sometimes. And that can slow your Lightroom down just a little bit. Brian, you've got a great question. Gone are the days when applying your edits in specific sequence is important, applying sharpening as your last edit. Not really. I do still have kind of a workflow, Brian, where sharpening is usually towards the end. I don't necessarily consider texture and clarity to be a critical part of sharpening. So I do allow those to happen a little bit early on. And here's the thing. There's a couple here. Okay, I'm going to argue against the auto edit on import for just a second and say that when you bring in a picture that you look at and you're like, this is one of the best I've ever captured. I can't wait to really get in and start editing this. I think you should hit the reset button and start from scratch. Because what happens sometimes, especially as beginners, you start to edit. You're like, well, this is a little bright. Let me bring it down. And it might not respond exactly the way you think it should because of where some of these other sliders have been moved by the auto. Whereas if you go to reset and you work your way down from the top without any other sliders already having been moved, I think you're going to be in a better position. But that's a select number of images. And as I said, I'm pretty selective in getting to my 4 or 5 stars, so it's not that often that I need to hit reset. Pretty often, the auto edit does me a good job of getting me a lot of the way there towards that final edit. So keep that in mind. But if at any time you're like, this doesn't look good, you can, of course, hit the reset button and come back to straight out of camera. Or I'm going to hit Command Z or Control Z to undo what I just did. That is a awesome kind of like safe self-saving function in Lightroom. You can't mess things up. You can always undo what you just did. Except like deleting rejected photos. That's a little harder to get it back in. But otherwise, it's very difficult to really mess up your picture. But let's hit reset real quick and work our way down through this picture briefly. Let's say you don't like the auto edit. So yeah, I want it to be a little bit brighter. How do I know I want it to be a little brighter? Well, I'm looking at it. I'm also looking at the histogram up here. In general, I want my histogram to be spread out from the left to the right. I don't really care what's happening in the middle. It could have a couple of spikes. It could have the bell curve. That isn't a perfect histogram. It could have a lot of different things going on. But what I care most about is that it is close to touching both the left and the right. That means that I'm going to have a full tonal range from a deep black to a nice bright clean white. So bringing up exposure a little bit. I'm going to add contrast. I do that to almost all of my pictures. Notice that contrast alone is smushing out my histogram and helping move it from end to end. Highlights, I don't really see anything that's too bright in here, but I notice when I bring it down that I like the richness that shows up in the petals a little more. So in this case, I wasn't looking at the histogram so much as the image itself. Shadows, I really kind of want to emphasize the darkness of the soil there. So I'm going to bring the shadows down even more and let that soil get dark. The whites, this is looking for the pure bright pixels and making them just a little bit brighter. It can often make your image pop. And notice how it really moves the right hand of the histogram up a bit. And then the blacks, I'm going to move down just a bit until we're just kissing the edge. If you hit the J key, it will show you areas. Let's be drastic for a second. There we go. That blue that's showing up is clipped areas. It is now so black that no information is there. If you were going to print this, that wouldn't look so good. It would be like a solid black blob within an area of otherwise detail. So I want to bring that back till it's just a teeny bit of the blue. And then I know it is just touching. And let's bring the whites further to the right until we start to see maybe, there we go. You see that showing up there on the petals? The red shows you the white area that's clipped. I'm going to bring it down. And you know what? It feels a little forced even up that high, so I'm going to bring it down a little bit further. And I think that looks pretty nice. We hit the backslash key. This is before, and this is after. This is a nice way to see how your changes have affected the image. All I did was move these sliders right here. That's it. You know what? I forgot, because I always bring this in, I do want to check these these can sometimes have a pretty, the lens correction can have a pretty significant impact on your image. So there are times where it's important to have these checked. Now, the presence, the white balance, cropping. What should we do next? Well, you know what? Right away I noticed that I've got like part of the garden border in here, and this is all creeping in. I'm going to hit the crop tool, and I'm just going to hit the A key. It's going to lock it. It's going to keep it in that same aspect ratio for right now. And I'm just going to kind of bring it in, keeping it centered, breaking the rule of thirds here, and just dead centering this guy. Somewhere right around there, I think, looks a little bit nicer. Notice that your histogram will change when you crop. It's showing you a histogram of just what's visible to you, so that can be useful to do. I'm going to hit the J key too. It does look like there's actually some blue showing up deep inside the center of the flower as well. All right, I am going to add a little bit of texture. This is my friend Steve Skirch, who many of you have been on tour with. Loves analogies. They're good. This section here, the presence, it's salt on food. Yeah, a little salt can really bring out the flavor of a dish. So you want to be pretty gentle with these. I think texture 30 is pretty gentle, but you'll talk to some people that never go above 10 or 15. This gets into some personal preferences. Clarity, I'm much more gentle with. I rarely go above 10 globally. Hold on to that idea of a global edit versus a local edit. Dehaze, this image doesn't have any haze, doesn't need that, so don't apply it. Vibrance, you know what? After our changes up here, this is looking pretty colorful, but let's just see what happens if we bring the vibrance up a little bit more. You know, we'll bring it down. Ooh, that could be neat. That could be a style you like. I think I'm going to come up +2. Saturation. If you are a beginner, I want you never to go above 5 globally. Just never go above 5. You so quickly push it into colors that just don't exist in nature that it screams, I'm new to editing. There are times where you can go higher in saturation, but not globally. So keep that in mind. But I'm going to bring it back down. I think it's fine where it was. One thing that you might run into sometimes is that you start to edit and you push the vibrance up, but when you bring it back down, you're like, oh, now it looks really flat and boring. That, you should say, you know what, I've been editing for a while. Let me get up, let me walk away from the computer, cup of tea, come back, and it should look just fine. Just keep that in mind. All right, so these look pretty good. I have my little slight contrast. You know what, that actually might be a little too punchy now. Let's go back to linear for this case. Now, this panel is awesome because you can affect individual colors. Very, very powerful in here. And I will oftentimes work through this section. Let's say I wanted the purples to be a little bit more saturated. Notice that I can really bring that purple saturation to 100, and I think it looks pretty natural. This is where you can bring up those saturations more. Green, I wouldn't though, because the green, look, as soon as you pull it up, it starts to look fake to me. You might even take it down just a notch. This is very powerful in here. You can also affect the brightness, and you can shift. Let's say that I wanted that green to be a more rich midsummer green or kind of a sickly fall green. You have that control. These are very powerful in here. Double clicking any of them will set it back to 0. Our detail slider, I go into detail in the packet about my settings in here and noise reduction as well. This was shot at ISO 250, but you start to see some grain when you zoom in. That doesn't, the level of grain right now doesn't bother me at all. But if you wanted to clean it up a little, you could bring this up. Again, it really depends each image and your settings. But honestly, if it's a noisy image, I really leave this at 0 and I go work on it in Topaz Denoise in a few more steps. All right. So, but what I wanted to talk to you about and what I kind of shared in this overview of this workflow is the new masking tools. So prior to the end of October Lightroom, you had these local area adjustment tools, and they allowed you to affect just a portion of your image. Those tools are still there, but they're even better than they were previously. Let's go to those tools now. Actually, let's pause for just a second and see, are there any questions that I should answer right now that would make sense? I've been using a newer laptop with a second set of Adobe programs. It now says edit at the end of the file name. It didn't say that on the other computer. Is it supposed to say that? That's Dr. LCM76. That means, Dr. LCM76, that you have taken that picture out of Lightroom into some other program and brought it back. That's how it gets that edit tag on it. I'll show that in a minute. Barbara says, I think Sony cameras do in-camera profile correction. I assume you therefore do not enable it as part of the preset. Is that correct? Barbara, that is a good question. It only applies to the JPEGs. It does not apply to the RAWs. So I do always have the enable profile corrections turned on in Lightroom, and I do have them turned on in my camera too if I wanted to get JPEGs out that were looking good as they are. Mike wants to know, can you edit a previously built preset, or at least view it, like say the import one before I and now forget what I selected? Yes, you can. You make your edits in that panel, and then you right click on the preset and you say update with current settings. The other way to see what your settings would be is to go to an image that hasn't had any edits made to it, apply that preset that you're wondering about, and then evaluate those sliders and see how they've moved. That will tell you what you have set for those things. And if you see the auto light up and sliders move on various numbers that aren't probably round numbers, that means you're probably letting auto work. But if things move to like 15, 15, 15, 30, 30, 30, you probably set all of that up there. And then Gary K, I think I just answered your question that Barbara had too. If your camera has lens correction, do you still want to do the Lightroom lens correction? And the answer is yes, you do. Okay? So, you're very excited, aren't you? You are waiting for me to talk to you about the new masking tools. They're awesome. They really are. So let's go back to Lightroom. I'm going to take a quick drink. So the tools used to live up here. They're all here, but now they're under one button. You click this, and this flies out. So pre-October version, we had brush, linear gradient, radial gradient, and then color range and luminance range and depth range. They were available, but they didn't have their own flyout. They were inside these three. What we have now is select subject, select sky, and these now have their own call out on the menu. We're going to go through all of these tonight. I said this workshop is going to be 90 minutes. Whew, buckle up. We got to get through a lot. All right. These masks use artificial intelligence to try to determine what your subject is and what your sky is, depending on which one you pick. In my experience so far, I've been using Lightroom almost every day since that October update, and it gets it right almost all of the time. Not all of the time, but a lot of the time. So in this case, I really want to work on just the flower itself a bit. And that is my subject. It is all pretty much in focus. I'm going to hit select subject, and Lightroom is going to take a moment to try to detect my subject. Not bad. I mean, I partly chose this example because I knew Lightroom would do a good job. Let's take a moment and evaluate what's going on here. All right, so it's turned green and the background's gone black and white because I have show overlay checked, and I have changed my overlay to be color overlay on black and white. So it is showing me what has been masked that way. Previously, the only option you had for masks or local area adjustments, as they really were called, was color overlay. So, and you could switch that color to one of these colors here. But now you could choose any color you want. But I really like having color overlay on black and white selected because you can see so easily exactly where the mask is ending, what it's got masked and what it hasn't got masked. The O key is the keyboard shortcut for that. But they've added another thing too. Nancy, I know you're watching. You told me this. When the overlay is on, when you come over and start to make an adjustment, it hides it for you. It's pretty nice. So you can start to adjust. Let's be drastic for a minute. Let me just wash the flower out. And then you come back over, and after a moment, no, there it goes. It'll show the overlay again. Now, you probably, once you have evaluated it, you don't need to see that overlay too often. I have found, though, sometimes this machine gets a little bogged down and it will flicker on and off. So I do like still using the O key to turn it off and on. So I have masked the flower, and now when I make changes, it is just the flower. And it's done a very, very nice job of masking it. So what do I want to do? Well, I think I do want to bring it down a little bit more and add a little more texture and clarity, not too much, to the flower itself. And I think that looks good. I like that. Nothing drastic. Now, wouldn't it be nice to quickly select the background? We don't have select background, but we've got a lot of more tools that we can do with this mask we've selected. I'm going to take this panel and drag it and drop it up here so it's sitting up here in this window. And I'm going to zoom into it for a second. So we have the mask. Let's rename this. Right click on it. Oops, now it's over there. Call it flower. There it is. And we click it and we see we've got the subject. You could rename that too if you wanted, but it's within this flower mask. If I come to these three dots, you saw that's where I saw the rename. I could also duplicate it. I could hide it. I could delete the flower. I could delete all masks right here. I want to duplicate the flower mask. So now I have two, and it does duplicate the changes. If you could see out of the corner of your eye, this got even darker and even more contrasty. That's not what I want though. So I'm going to just, with the flower copy selected, let's go ahead and rename it now. You know where I'm going with this? Oh, it's over here. Now you do. Let's zoom back out. I'm going to affect the background with this. But wait, you say, it's the flower. Look at the little thumbnail. It's the flower. Nope. I'm going to open this up, going to go to subject, and I'm going to invert this mask. So it is no longer the flower, it is the background. Let's hit the O key to see that overlay. There it is. Now what can we do? Well, let's zoom out the rest of the way so we get a better look at our image. I'm going to double click the effect word effect right here. I'm on the background mask. I'm going to double click effect. That's going to zero out all of my settings. I'm going to start to decrease texture. That's going to soften the background. I'm going to decrease clarity. It's going to soften the background. You notice that? The noise removal, I'm going to jack that up to 100. So suddenly that noise, this is an image that we might not need to go to Topaz Denoise for. That noise that was there in the background is pretty much gone. What else could I do? I could bring exposure down a little bit more. I could bring saturation down. It's going to desaturate the green. I think that looks pretty nice. I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. Anything else that we need to do to this right here, right now? I don't think so. Let's stay in Lightroom for a minute, though. There are some things I would like to work on this in Photoshop, and also maybe Topaz. Sharpen. Not Denoise, but Sharpen. But let's keep this in. Let's move over here to this image here. Here is one of the Tetons. And first thing I'm going to do is hit the R key. Right away I'm going to crop. I'm going to bring this down because there's a lot of sky that's just really boring up there. Where do I want to come down to? Maybe right above, right in there. I like that. Just above the end of those clouds. Maybe I'll come in a little bit here. It's starting to look square. Maybe I'll go 1-to-1 square. So, okay, 1-to-1 square. Now, let's work on the sky a little bit. It's a little washed out. I want it to pop a little bit more. I'm going to hit the mask tool, select sky. It's going to take a moment. and it's going to select my sky. Now, for those of you who have these pictures at home on your machines, you might get slightly different masks because Lightroom is deciding, and it's not going to decide the exact same every time. I've seen that both with the masking and I've seen that with auto edit. It might not move the settings all the way to the same numbers. Just letting you know. So here's the sky. It's masked. And notice that it's overlapping on the mountain a little bit. Well, a couple of things. That's partly by design to allow your sky edits to fade out smoothly. But there are times where you don't want that, so you have to watch out for it. Let's say you didn't want it this time. So what do we do? Well, first off, let's rename this. Let's call it My Sky. It's always nice to have names to these things because right now you think, oh yeah, I know that's the sky. But in a year, when you come back and open this picture and you see your different mask thumbnails there, you want to just make it as easy as possible for yourself. So I have two buttons, add and subtract, underneath the sky. Let's hit the subtract and I get all of my mask options again. I could choose the brush. Click the brush and it is a minus brush. I'm going to use the left bracket key to make it a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to start brushing along the edge of the mountain. And I'm doing a quick sloppy job to show you how to do this, mostly how to say subtract and use it. Now, you can see that I have removed that from there. That's where I've brushed. All right, and there's less blue on the mountain now. If you wanted a little bit better precision, let's undo this brush because that was kind of sloppy. And let's hit subtract again, brush again. This time I'm going to check auto mask. This helps you, this is Lightroom helping you stay within the lines. What it means is that if you paint mostly inside what is a clear border, Lightroom will avoid you brushing out of that border. So you see it's doing a little bit better job in here. A little bit. You should have that on whenever you're working around edges that you don't want to paint outside of. You can see it still did not a great job. If you're painting in the middle of something, turn it off though, because Lightroom's working very hard to try to be helpful and it will lag you and slow you down. But I think this is a good enough look here. But there's one more way that we could do this. Let's delete this brush one. And we're back to being on the landscape again. We could subtract using a luminance range. Now we have this. This is a slider from the darkest regions of the image to the brightest regions of the image, represented by 0 to 100. And I want the darker part of the mountain to not have any of the selection on it. So I'm going to peel this away from the darker portion. There are some bugs. I didn't practice this one before the workshop. There are some bugs in this version of Lightroom. So, or this in this masking, the masking tools. Yeah. It's just starting to peel off way up here. I don't know if that's going to give me what I want. I don't think it did. We're going to say that that was a terrible idea, and we're just going to delete the luminance range. So we'll leave it. I'm going to show you the luminance range in maybe another one or a color range in just a moment. All right, so what can we do to this guy? Well, let's hit the O key to turn it off. Let's warm it up a little bit, just a bit. Let's bring exposure down some. I really want the detail, and I want to increase the contrast. Shadows. I want these. These were some pretty good storm clouds, and I want them to look a little bit more impressive than I think they do right now. We want to be careful though. Look where I brushed sloppily. Oh no, this isn't the brushing. This is just leftover bits. There's a little bit of haze and fuzz there that I don't like, so you want to watch out for that. I am going to actually decrease texture and clarity. I think this, you could argue either way, but I'm going to increase dehaze. So it gives the clouds a little bit more definition, but they don't get too crunchy. They look still like nice soft clouds by going down texture and clarity. I think you can make arguments for going up as well, but be careful. Similar to oversaturating, I think beginners oftentimes take texture and clarity too high, and this is an example of when you can go lower and have it look pretty nice. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. And I'll say close. And of course we can hit the backslash key to say what it looked like before and after. And look, the change is pretty significant with just one sky selection and some basic edits on this image. Now, what if we wanted this greenery in this area down here to pop more? Well, let's come back to our mask tools. Oh, we got to get off. That's it. I haven't run into that. Because I was still in the before view, the mask panel wouldn't show up. I'm going to create a new mask, the linear gradient. I'm just going to drag up from the bottom. It is very similar to the graduated filter of before. But now nicely they give you a little radius turner to grab, and you've just got these pins that you can grab. Middle one allows you to move it up and down. The top or bottom allows you to extend the fade of this graduated filter or linear gradient. And let's just brighten that up. And let's decrease the tint into the green too, so it'll just get a nice little bit nicer and green down there. Not bad. All right, let's move on. I want to show you one more power of mask. I just really didn't do a good job showing you the luminance. So let me show you this one, color range. So let's say we wanted to select our model here, our ribbon spinner. And you could try subject select, but you know what? I did, and it doesn't work very well. So because you've got a lot of other stuff going on. The background's pretty in focus. The ribbon is right in the camera's face. So altogether, it confuses Lightroom, and it doesn't do a good job of selecting the subject. But let's try color range. So you click color range, and instantly, hold on. I think we've melted the computer down a little bit here. Let's hit reset. Color range. There we go. Instantly, I didn't bring my cursor over. Instantly, you get a dropper. This dropper is to be used to select the color or colors that you're interested in selecting. So, I'm going to click on her blue leotard. Now, we have the worst overlay possible right now. So let's go to color overlay on black and white. And also let's change it from blue to the ugly green. Now, we can see that by selecting the blue here, it also found blue in other spots in the image. Everything that is a bit green would be selected right now. But we have this refinement slider. It starts in 50. That's the default setting. But if we drag it down, it becomes more and more selective. It has to be much closer to the blue you selected. The higher you go, the more it's like, I love all blues. Down here, it's like, I only love this blue, no other blue. So you find a spot at which it selects as much of your color that you wanted without any other color. If it's not doing a great job, you can do a couple of different things. You can hold down the Shift key and notice that the dropper now, it might be hard to see, has a little plus sign next to it. It will allow you to add other blues to the party. You can click up to 5 points of the color you want to include. And now notice that really we have all of her blue leotard selected. What can you do? Well, all of those same edits over here, and let's turn this overlay off. The one that's most fun to do with something like this is to shift the hue. Let's say we wanted her to be in a green leotard. come on, you would have no idea. You might say there, why would anybody ever wear a leotard of that color? But look at this power of being able to shift that color in that region so precisely. All we had to do was click a couple of times over here and drag our refinement slider so that we've selected that. That is powerful and very, very nice. Okay? All right. Let's come back over to this flower because we've got a couple of other things to do before we answer other questions and start to say we're done. All right, so let's say that I wanted to work on this in, actually, you know what? Let's go to the mountain. I think the mountain's a good example for this. Let's say we wanted to work on this in Photoshop. How do we get there? Well, right-click on the image, Edit In. You have the option of editing in Photoshop here, or open as a smart object down below plugins. You can see I've got a handful of plugins. I think you should do smart object in Photoshop most of the time. It makes the file a little bit bigger, but it gives you some of the power that Lightroom already gives you also inside Photoshop. Now, before we go here though, a couple of things. One, I want to point out that over here is a history panel of everything that we have done to this image. It's quite a bit. This history will stay here forever. It will only disappear if you choose to clear it out or delete it, or you take this image to Photoshop and you come back with a copy, because everything that comes back from Photoshop is a copy. One of the strengths of Lightroom is that it does not work on your master image. So it can't. And that's one of the reasons why I say go crazy with your sliders. You can't kill your image. You can't do irreparable damage or harm to your image. So keep that in mind. But also keep in mind that once you leave Lightroom and go into Photoshop or Topaz, when you come back, you have none of that history anymore on that copy. So many of you had questions about the workflow. And the answer is do as much as possible in Lightroom until you're ready to do your last bits in Photoshop of finishing or Topaz denoising or sharpening. Because you don't want to then have two images with like half histories in both. Try to have all of your history in one, and then boom, you go to that third-party program for that last bit of stuff. That makes sense? All right. Edit in, open a smart object in Photoshop. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to check questions real quick. It takes, again, it's going to open Photoshop. Well, here, let's do Lightroom and me. Then we can see how long does it take for Photoshop to fully open that up. So Laurie wanted to know, is there a way when you're in the mask that you can work on individual colors? Well, that would be choosing, I think maybe I just answered this with the choosing the color mask. Then you're choosing only those colors, and now you're affecting only those colors. That would be the way to do that. I think what you're asking is, can you have like a hue and saturation panel within a mask? And no, you can't really. So then do color selection of just that color for you, Lori. That's it. And I think we're doing good otherwise on questions. So, yes. Okay. Here we are in Photoshop. It feels daunting. I really walk you through the basics of the beginning of Photoshop. Window, workspace, photography, I recommend. It gives you the tools you want. I talk a little bit about these tools over here, how more things can be hidden underneath and what you want. My layers panel escaped earlier today. Let's stick it back where it belongs. You can drag those around so you see your layers panel. Now, what do we want to do here? Well, I'd like to make the mountain pop a little bit more. Couple of ways to do that. I'm going to show you the Photoshop way and then the Topaz way, and I think we'll be in pretty good shape. I'm going to go to Select Subject. Notice that Photoshop has sky and subject. It also has focus area. It also has color range. I used to go to Photoshop a lot more often to affect a portion of the image because it had such great selection tools. But now that Lightroom has better selection tools, I'm doing most of that work in Lightroom and only coming into Photoshop when I want to do different things like the sharpening that Lightroom can't really do, or then moving to Topaz, or compositing and things like that. Not that I do a lot of compositing, but some. Let's see what happens when I say select subject. Let's take a moment and, geez, not bad. Selected the mountain. Looked pretty good. It missed a little spot right here. But you know what? For the purposes of this, I'm going to say that's just fine. It also kind of took a dive down that glacier up on the top there. Now what I want to do is I want to put this selection on its own layer. Now, I'm ambitious in this workshop, and then I'm gonna talk about layers in Photoshop. We just landed in Photoshop, but I'm going to talk about layers. If you do Command J, you duplicate your selection and move or copy that selection to a new layer. And if I turn the bottom layer off, it's just visible. Just what I selected is visible, sitting on top. So, and I could grab it and drag it around. There's my mountain and move it all around like that. But let me do Command Z, undo, or Control Z on Windows to put that mountain back where it belonged. What can I do now that that mountain is on its own layer? Well, a couple of things. What I typically like to do is go to Filter, Other, High Pass. And it makes this really ugly thing. And you want to move this slider until you're seeing kind of the detail that you want to see. It really depends on image to image. Mine was up at 9. It was a little high. I will say you can go a little bit higher than you think because there's a way in a moment to soften it back up. So let's just type in 9 here. So I'm seeing all the detail in the rocks, right? So I say 9, I say OK. That's on this layer 1. Do you see how it's a little gray mountain now? Sad little mountain sitting on top of the mountain down below. What I want to do in this layer panel is change the blending mode to overlay. Do you see all these different modes? See how it flops through them over there on the left? And most of them are horrible and ugly. They have uses, but the one we want is overlay. Some people do soft light, hard light. I like overlay. Now, this mountain, let's drag it over here. Oh, it won't let me zoom in. Now, this mountain, I just want to put it over here. Here we go. So we're getting close. So we can kind of see both these things at the same time. That is too much. It's lost some contrast. It looks a little gray and washed out. Let's remind ourselves what it looked like before. Notice how much crispier it looks though. Too crispy, in my opinion. So how do we fix that? We simply lower the opacity. So with these layers, just this gray mountain is sitting on top of our beautiful photo. And we're just going to make it a little bit more see-through. We're going to drop the opacity until it starts to look good. And then turn it back off. And then turn it on. Back off, on. And decide, does it look good? Does it look bad? Maybe a little less opacity, maybe all the way down to 60%. And then I think it's starting to look pretty good. So, I like that. Let's say that's all I wanted to do to it here in Photoshop. How do I get back to Lightroom? You close it and you say yes, save. Always do this part slowly. Every once in a while I accidentally click don't save and then I've lost all my work. I don't lose what I had in Lightroom, but I lost everything I did in Photoshop. So slowly click the blue save button. Now it takes a moment to write it, to save it, and let's jump ahead. Let's come back here to Lightroom, well, the Photoshop. There we go. Look at that. It's appeared next to my original one. And I'm sorry I can't remember the name of the person who asked. They said they have the edit next to it. Notice it came back as a PSD with the little edit next to it with all of the original file names still there. And this is also a nice way where you could now put these two side by side and kind of make some comparisons and some decisions whether or not you pushed it too far while you're over in Photoshop or not. It comes back with the same rating as the other one, so keep that in mind. I think it didn't have any keywords to begin with. Every once in a while, somebody will write me and say, Toby, when I come back from Photoshop, I can never find the files. They're just missing. What happens in that case a lot of times is people have a filter turned on for file type. They may have turned it to the RAW. And so Lightroom is not allowed to show you PSDs or TIFFs or other files when you come back. So Lightroom's like, hey, you got that file back, but I can't show it to you. So you got to go to all file types, and then that file will show up there. Now, let's do the Topaz version. So again, I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to say edit in, and I am taking the RAW back over. I don't want to take the other Photoshop one. I do in the packet talk about what do you do when you realize that there's another change you wanted to make to it. I talk about that. There's options and things of that sort. So we're going to come back to Photoshop. Now I said Topaz, but why am I going back to Photoshop? Because I like Photoshop's masking tools over Topaz's masking tools. And in this case, I'm actually going to do two things here. I'm going to say select subject again and get the mountain. But you know what? I want less. I want just the rocks. This area actually looks a little washed out and noisy to me, in fact. So I'm going to get my selection tool, hold down the Alt, and I'm going to just kind of deselect this area. And I'm going to do it very quickly because we're running out of time. So I just want to make sure I get all of that. Yeah. So I'm deselecting that. So it's really just the rocky top. I think that's a song. Command J moves it to its own layer. That layer is selected. Now I'm going to go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Sharpen. And it's saying, hey, you're about to go into Topaz. Here's what I like about this. Topaz, Sharpen, and Denoise, they're not the speediest programs. The latest versions of them have improved greatly. But on slower machines, you may be waiting quite some time. And if you only take what you need over to the program, then you're going to be in better shape. All right, usually by default it comes up in this kind of single view, and this might look weird to you, but it's because it just brought over that layer that I want sharpened. You can see that I got a little extras on the sides there. It's okay, we'll fix that later. I like to go from here to the comparison view, 4 up. You have all 4 images. I'll make this a little bit bigger. Side by side. Too soft, motion blur, out of focus, too soft. Those are the options. You have so many different sharpening models. And again, if you haven't updated your Sharpen in a while, they've changed this. But I just want too soft, normal, really. What's that one loaded? Yeah, right here, too soft, normal. In this case, I'm pretty sure that's what the mountain doesn't have motion blur. My shutter speed was fine. All of that was fine. This is the algorithm that's probably going to be best for this. So I just wait for each of these to update if there's plenty of time, and then pick the one that looks best. But in this case, I know that the too soft normal looked good, so I have that selected. You can move around these model parameters a little bit, but I'm just going to say apply. And it's going to take a moment, and it's going to process that image. Let me see if there's any questions why it's processing that image. Lynn asked a great question. I use both Topaz Sharpen and Denoise after starting in Lightroom Classic. Does the order of these two Topaz processes matter? You know, I tell you what, Lynn, it's rare that I use both programs on images completely. I usually do this method of where I am being selective about what parts are getting sharpened and what parts are getting denoised. So, but I would say in general that sharpening is the last thing that you want to do. Use denoise to get rid of the noise, and then sharpen to add that detail in those areas that it's important to be in. One of the reasons that I like this method, and we're back in Photoshop now, is that I can hide. This is the layer, layer 1. Let's rename it. Been sharpened. I can turn that layer off and on, and it's a very quick, easy preview of the difference. You watching on Lightroom, or sorry, on YouTube, which is all of you, I don't have a studio audience, not even the dog is down here, might not see this difference. It is subtle, but it's a difference that I think makes the image a little bit better without looking over sharpened. So you can turn that off and on. Let's take it a step further though, and it doesn't matter that this was the same image that we went to sharpening, but I'm going to get the selection tool and I am going to select this kind of area that I feel like is a little on the noisy side. So I just dragged my lasso tool over that area real quick. I have, or I need to, select my main photo again, Command J again, and now that layer is all by itself. See it there? And you know what we're going to do? We're going to go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Denoise. Denoise. And it's going to open up the Denoise plugin. And it's going to allow us to make these edits. And then we're going to come back to Lightroom. While we wait for that, let me check questions. Sean wants to know, what is the scenario where you would edit in Photoshop and not use the Smart Object option? That's great. Maybe I should go into a tiny bit more detail about what the Smart Object does. It allows you to come back into Camera Raw within Photoshop at any point to make edits to your image. And it is quite powerful in that. To be honest, it's something that I've only really recently started using, and I think I will always use it moving forward because it gives you that little bit more flexibility to do further edits in Photoshop. There are times where I then bring it back into Lightroom and I want to make a few more edits, but it would be better to have it all in Photoshop at that point so that there's not this kind of mixed history. That's how I answer that. All right, I go in Denoise to the comparison view and I let it run for a minute. You have standard is not one anywhere in here. It's got low light twice for some reason. I'm going to click standard. Yeah, there we go. Standard is often very good. When you're removing noise, doesn't matter in Topaz, doesn't matter in another program or in Lightroom, you are walking a fine line between detail and noise. And removing noise basically just blurs the image a little bit to hide the grain. What Topaz can do better than Lightroom is blur it and remove that grain without losing much detail. And it actually puts some detail back so you can enhance sharpness. So you just want to look and scan through your image. And it's important to really, if this is an image that you're truly working up, especially if you're going to print, really to inspect it thoroughly when using either of these programs, because they're great, but they can introduce some weirdness in areas where maybe the noise reduction algorithm got a little bit more aggressive than another area, and you end up with this kind of like weirdness. That's the best way I could describe it. But looking over here in standard, looks pretty good. And detail looks good still. You can see that it gets like a little misty over here. Maybe it was even raining. And so I'm judging those areas, and I think standard looks good. So I'm just going to hit apply, and it's going to do the exact same thing that the Sharpen was doing. It's going to bring these back now and put this layer back in to the image. Now, kind of similar to Sean's question is, well, it's not really, but it is when I come back to Photoshop here in a second, I now have 3 layers. Let's say noise be gone on that layer. And let's zoom in a little bit and see if we've done anything amazing here with the noise be gone. That's what it looked like pre-noise removal and then after we took it over. And I'll say that the borders of it are a little abrupt for my taste, but I think it was raining in some of those areas. Oops. So, there are ways to kind of smooth that out down the road, but that's a Photoshop lesson that I'll bring you, or Tanya will bring you at some point in the future. Someone will bring you. All right. Now, the question is, do you leave these layers before you go back to Lightroom? And if you are sure that you don't need to manipulate these individual layers ever again, you should compress them all, merge layers. It's going to be a lot smaller of a document, But if you think you might come back and make some changes to this in the future, keep them. But it does make the document a good bit larger. So I'll just say close. Remember what I click save, and then it'll be back in Lightroom. All right. That is my general workflow in a nutshell. Now, Lisa asked an email question. I wonder if you could show how to save photos back into Lightroom once you've completed the final edits. Yep, I've done that. Jamie sent me 2 raw files for the class tonight. She wants me to see the sky replacement tools in action. Let's take a few moments and do a little bit of that. I can't see you. If you have to go, that's fine. If you haven't hit the thumbs up button yet, you could do that. And just subscribe to me if you haven't on Insta, on Twitter, on YouTube. Those all would be very nice. But let's come back to Lightroom and me. Let's go to the images that you all sent in. What did I do with them? Did I put them in here with the other ones? Or, I know I had them. Oh, yeah, right here. Okay. So Jamie's got these 2 images, and she would like to see the sky replaced. You know what, Jamie? I actually don't know if you and I know each other. You're a pen member. I can do up a quick video for this differently. It's not really in the scope of this video. If you're squeamish, look away. Patrick sent in this picture of this snake getting a bird. It does have a happy ending, though. He wrote me the whole story. The bird, he came out, scared the snake away, gave the bird basically, I don't want to say mouth to mouth. You seem to somehow have resuscitated the bird, and it ended up flying away. And also at some point saved your family pet from getting bit by the snake. So, Patrick, you think these pictures are great because they're an amazing memory, which they are. Are they savable? I tell you, they're pretty rough. These are JPEGs. If you have RAWs, there's going to be more detail in there. But real quick, let's just see if we just add some contrast, what happens. I think we actually bring exposure down a little bit. Highlights down, shadows down, blacks down a little bit, whites up. They are pretty noisy. But let's go straight from here into Topaz Sharpen, actually. And I had a couple people write and say, hey, you know, I don't always see my plugins in Lightroom, especially for Topaz and, for the Topaz. And the answer to that is try installing them again, or in this handout I've given you, I've linked to Topaz's instructions for how to make them work. So this is where Sharpen AI can sometimes be quite amazing. Let's look at the backside of the bird. I don't know, it's seeing its poor little head there, even though I know it got away, is a little bit. So let's go with motion blur very blurry for one, and let's go for too soft very blurry, and see how much fixing the Topaz Sharpen can do here. Also, while we're waiting for a second, Patrick asked the same question. He's not interested in subscribing to Adobe. So what do I recommend? The next best, if you don't want to pay Adobe, and I can understand that to a degree, but I do think the value of Lightroom and Photoshop together at $10 a month is a good value. Okay? But if you don't want to pay it, if you don't like the idea of subscribing to your software, the next program that I would recommend is DxO Labs. I think they've done a nice job. It's very Lightroom-like, and there's no subscription there. All right, so how do we do? This is where, look at the feathers back here. They actually have some decent detail in them now. And this is one thing that really, every time you move, it has to update these again. I think, Patrick, I'm going to say that these aren't really fixable to any great degree. We are looking at images that are soft enough, blurry enough, and JPEGs that just really limit what we can do to them. And even though Sharpen AI is a pretty impressive program, it does have limits. If you really want, I mean, I don't think that is too much. If you really wanted to work at it, you could try to take it into Photoshop, separate your subject from the background, really soften the background, and that can often make your subject, even if it isn't that sharp, stand out more. So I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to say close without saving. I will point out, though, that unlike Photoshop, because you started the process, you still end up with a new file. Even though we didn't do anything, we now have a TIFF file, and that does take up a lot of space, so you want to watch out for that. Mike sent in a bracketed series of images. Lovely sunset or sunrise. I'm trying to think of what direction that is to the mountain. I don't know. Plus this double lenticular stack up here. This is nice because I can show this cool trick. We're going to select all three of these images. Mike, it looks like you were on a tripod because I see no movement between these images. So you shot a bracketed series with your camera. And Lightroom will very happily combine those for you. We're going to go to Edit, we're going to go to Photo Merge, HDR. Now, HDR has a kind of a bad rap to it. I think that can be pushed too far. But making one image out of three, what it's going to do for us, I'm just going to say auto line, doesn't really need to, auto settings, deghosting amount. I'm going to put low. There might have been a tiny amount of movement in the clouds. So that's going to help make sure there aren't any weird artifacts in any areas that might be a little bit different. Let's go to just Lightroom 2. And wow, it's really struggling to build that preview. Maybe we'll go back to none. We'll pretend that we did low. And now it is actually merging them. And so we can see this slider up here. And it's going to make a new image for me, a fourth image that is supposed to be all of the best parts of the other images. Is it this last one? Yeah, I think it is. Why? No, it's that one. That makes more sense. Okay. It has HDR in the file name. And so you can see that the bottom half is exposed nicely because it used from this brighter image that, and the dark one that got all of the nice clouds and the bits of color back here, it brought those in. Typically, I mean, I do less HDRs these days, less bracketed images, unless it's an extreme dynamic range, because many of our sensors are capable of some pretty serious editing. But it does give you more latitude, and anytime you're standing at a scene as beautiful as this, it doesn't hurt to shoot a quick bracketed image. It gives you a little bit more to work with. Other things that I would do to this real quick, as an example, I think I'd like a panorama view of this. How do you know when to crop? Oh, we didn't talk about exporting, did we? Sugars. So let's bring it somewhere around here. As beautiful as that sky is, at a certain point, it's just doing the same thing over and over and over again. So we don't need as much of that sky to tell the story. I'm thinking about rule of thirds. Got our nice mountain there on that third. We could, of course, hit select sky, and it's going to mask that sky for us. And then what can we do to it? Let's turn that overlay off. Let's add a little bit of texture. See, I don't know. Go either way. What happens if we bring texture down but dehaze up again? No, I don't like that. Let's go texture up a little bit and a little bit of clarity. Not too much. I really like what it does over here. Maybe not as much up in this area. So you could subtract and brush to decrease the effect amount that's done up there. Or you could brush on to just affect that portion. Now, let's duplicate this. A little bit of, what do you call it? Repetition from what we did earlier. And let's do our renaming, sky. Now that we've duplicated this, we are going to invert it. So then we're going to call it landscape. And let's brighten that even a little bit more. And warm it up too. I feel like it should have a little bit more of that warmth that's filling the sky as well. And I might bring texture and clarity down because I think that's going to be a little bit noisy down there in the shadows, and I don't think it needs to pop that much. It's just kind of a soft, misty morning there. Something like that. One thing that I might do, bring this over into Photoshop, and just these bits of trees here, I'd cut out because they're just so dark against this kind of green field in this area in there. You could crop in. Let's see what happens if we come in all the way past that. I think I don't like it as much. So let's come back. And let me talk about exporting to share with the world real quick, because I said I was going to do that, and then we'll be done. Let's come back to the workshop images. So we've got this one right here. Let's say I wanted to share this with Instagram. Well, honestly, for Instagram, I almost always want vertical 8x10 format. That takes up the most amount of space on the screen, so that when people are viewing Instagram and your images, yours is going to be the only one on the screen. That's going to be nice and big. So I'm going to go to this 4x5, 8x10 view, and I'm going to hit the X key to rotate that so that it's a vertical crop in this case, like that. Now, I'm going to go to File, Export. You know, we haven't done any saving. I think everybody watching, you're beyond the basic enough of Lightroom. Everything we've done has been saved instantly in Lightroom. But if I go to File, Export, I actually have an Instagram/Facebook export. It's going to put it in a folder for me that I know where, and it's accessible on all of my different devices because it's Google Drive. Actually, I'm using Dropbox now because the new Google Drive is terrible. It's a JPEG. Quality, that actually should be 82. I don't know when it got to be 74. Quality is 82. Resize to fit long edge, about 2000. Don't enlarge. Sharpen for screen, a little bit more low. And once you put these settings in, and I cover these settings in the packet, then you say add, and you call this My Insta Export, so that you don't have to remember or make these changes every time. And you hit create, and now it just lives here as My Insta Export. Let's talk about for print. I might blow your mind here. When you want to print something, you don't need to worry. Wait, I'm not on the screen. You don't need to worry about DPI, PPI. No. I mean, you do a little bit, but not really. All you need to do, let's say I wanted to print this, and maybe I want this to be a square print or the original format. But let's go ahead and switch it back to this. So we're just the 2x3, 4x6 is the sensor. So we're just going to kind of come in like so. I've cropped it. So you need to decide what aspect ratio you're going to print it and crop it to that aspect ratio. That's the first thing you need to decide. And if you're going to print with a wonderful print house like Bay Photo Lab, you don't have to choose an 8x10 or 4x6. You can crop to whatever aspect ratio makes sense to you and then buy a custom metal print or a regular print at whatever size you want. They'll do that for you, and you should do that because sometimes your story, your image doesn't fit the standard cropping. Now, if you're going to walk into Michael's and buy an 8x10 frame and put it in there, well, then you're going to have to figure out how to make it work for that. But you shouldn't constrain yourself to the frames in Michael's. Go custom. Now, I have cropped it to the aspect ratio that I want to print. I'm going to go to File, Export, ... again. I have a one for print, and it's going to put it into a folder called Prints and Such. It's going to be a JPEG, 100 quality. It's going to still be the sRGB color space. Some print houses do want you to switch it to Adobe RGB. Bay Photo Labs does for some of their metal prints and some of the other ones. So check with whoever you're printing with to see what color space they want. Resize to fit. There's no check mark there. Resolution, doesn't matter what's in here. It's going to take your image as big as it is, whatever resolution it is after you've cropped for the aspect ratio, and you're going to send it off to that lab to get printed. Now, if you're asking for a giant print, and I'm talking bigger than 20x30, well, you should check in. If you've cropped your image a lot, then maybe it's not going to be able to print at a high enough DPI for that. But honestly, these days, that is a very rare case. Almost always, your print is big enough, high enough resolution to get a print at a very large size if you want it. And they'll warn you. And again, Bay Photo I love because I check the box of Yes, I want Bay Photo to color correct it if it needs it. And I have never been not satisfied with the way the images look when they come back to me. And I've never calibrated my monitor either. I do have a nice Apple monitor, that helps, but otherwise, that's it. Whew! Are we done? Did we finish? That was a lot. Let's see, are people still watching? Oh yeah, good. Nice, okay. Are there any other questions that I've gotten? Sue, can you explain a little bit about white balance? Am I doing something wrong? That's a good question, Sue. Let's answer that. So how do I judge white balance? Well, it is a judgment. Most of the time, I'm using auto white balance in my camera, and when it's imported into Lightroom, the white balance is set as shot. But if I look at it and say, I want it to be a little warmer, then I grab the slider and I move it to the warmer tones. Or if I want to cool it down a little, I cool it down to the cooler tones. You can always go back to as shot. Sometimes it's easy to just pick one of these and say, well, what does Lightroom think that the white balance should be for this? So it changed it a little bit. But most of the time I'm happy with as shot. When it gets trickier, I think, is when you're talking about people, because then you're talking about skin tones, and you want skin tones to be accurate. Now, in this case of our bus driver cowboy extraordinaire for our winter Yellowstone trip, when you're in the white balance section, you've got a dropper here, same as that color picker, and you can bring it out and drop it in a neutral area of the image, and it should decide what looks best for this scene. It decided poorly. That is a tint in a white balance. It just doesn't look good. So let me try to sample from a different area, maybe in the shadow. No. So it's not good. So I got to eyeball this now. Or let's go back here real quick and say daylight, because I know he is lit by daylight coming through these big windows in this bar. Hey, daylight's not bad. Maybe a touch red. He looks a little red to me. So I'm going to move the tint towards green. I don't want you to always think of that as adding green. In this case, it's subtracting red. So that's the easiest thing that I would say about white balance right there. Laurie says, do you ever go directly from Lightroom to Topaz or just from Photoshop? Is there a benefit from one or the other if you aren't going to layer? No. If you aren't going to layer, going straight from Lightroom is just fine. But what I would say is really noise reduction and sharpening should almost always be selective. If you're doing it to the whole image, I think you're doing it wrong. That said, there are masking tools in Topaz that are useful. I just don't like them that much, and so I don't use them. But you can. Tom wants to know if Roy can tell if he's still a pen member. Tom, send me a quick email. I can check that quickly for you. And do we have an Instagram tab, or is it there? And we're not on the screen for the last question, Roy says. What's that mean? So, if you're watching this long and you haven't hit that thumbs up button, I'd really appreciate that. And if you're not already following me, that would be nice. And you should consider, it's just been on me as I was talking about white balance that whole time. I'm sorry. Shoot. Boogers. Apologize for that. Here. This is where, here's we got Sweeney. And we click the dropper right here. We click his shirt, and I think Lightroom does a bad job. Or this shirt isn't good. So you could try clicking from a different area, but I just don't quite like it. So then I'd come over here and say, well, I know that he's being lit by daylight. Let's see what Lightroom does when I ask it for daylight. And I think it does a pretty good job, but it seems a little too red to me. So I'm going to drag the tint slider to the left toward green. And what I said was, don't always think of that as adding a color. You can sometimes think of it as subtracting. So somewhere in here is a sweet spot where he doesn't start to look green, but he doesn't look quite as red. So that's where I would go for that. Thank you, Roy, for bringing that to my attention. Sorry, folks. Sorry. Jamie, you have to add the Instagram tab for exporting. When you go to File, Export, ... you make your changes here, and then you click this Add button, and it'll allow you to call it whatever you want right there. All right. This is long. People are going to come across this video and go, 2 hours, I'm never watching it. So I'm going to end it now. You're a Pen member, you know where to find me. Send me these questions. I want to hear them. They are good for me. They're good for you. I will get them answered to you. If you're watching this, the link to this PDF is right down below the video. Help yourself to it. I'm very proud of it. I think that it could be sold for a lot of money. It's very thorough. Hey, but if you find any mistakes, let me know. But it's yours for free. Linked down below this video. So there it is for you. And yeah, if you're not a Pen member and you'd like more content like this, well, then sign up. Photorec.tv/pen is the easiest way to do that. Thank you all so much for watching. Roy, thank you so much for doing the hard work of collecting all those questions. That was super helpful. I really appreciate it. Everybody, you have a wonderful night. And hold on, it's December 1st. We have 1 month left. We got to start talking about making sure our catalog is nice and clean for the end of the year. And I want you, if you're watching this, I want you to participate in the end of the year Photorec TV slideshow. You need to pick your favorite image you captured, you created, you made this year and submit it to me for a slideshow. It brings me to tears every year. It's just an awesome kind of community event that we do here at Photorec.tv and Pen. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure you're subscribed to me. Thanks, everybody. I will talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.